Last time, I argued that your worldview, your beliefs about fundamental issues like the nature of reality, the nature of humans, or the nature of morality, has real-life consequences for everything that truly matters to you. Therefore, I propose that it should be our priority to develop a reasonable philosophy of life, and to seek truth regarding these questions. Today, we will start this adventure by looking at our theory of knowledge, or epistemology. Before we begin to investigate the makeup of reality, we first need some idea how we can discover what's true. It is unlikely that our way of acquiring knowledge is trustworthy just by chance, without ever reflecting on it. So, how to know what's true? First, you must understand the meaning of your own beliefs and the beliefs of others. If you don't understand what's being said, you will obviously be unable to know if it's true. Let me try to illustrate this. Most people assume that there is an objective reality in which all of us exist. This reality exists independent of us, however, through our minds we can experience this reality, at least to some extent. We have sensory and mental experiences, like thoughts and emotions, in relation to this reality. We can then try to describe these experiences through language. Human societies made up words, code signals, to describe experiences. You can find these code signals in a lexicon, a rule book for the employment of words, which is based on the empirical investigation of how people generally speak and write. In a next step, we can then arrange these words into sentences. There are many different types of sentences, however the most important distinction we will look at is between factual and evaluative claims. Factual claims, like there are 9 planets in our solar system, can be true or false, and these are the kind of statements we are mainly concerned with here. Evaluative claims, like puppies are cute, are not true or false in the same sense factual claims are. However, we will talk about these kinds of statements in more detail in a later video concerned with value and morality. Now, as long as our code book is the same and as long as we know which code word refers to which experience, we can communicate our imaginings and experiences to others, and study our own thoughts more effectively. Unfortunately, in reality, our code books are never exactly the same. Most code words have ambiguous, uncertain or many different meanings that are context-dependent. So, if you use words in an unspecific or careless way, other people, and even yourself, might be confused to which experience you are referring to. Therefore, we need to analyze and study language. We need to translate our experiences as precisely as possible and use the code words that are actually referring to our experience. We can identify the proper definition of words, what words are actually referring to, by observing how these words are used in practice. After eliminating these inaccuracies, we can successfully communicate and understand our experiences. What we then usually mean when we ask if a belief is true, is whether the experience, that is now properly described by the belief, represents subjective reality. I'll give you an example. Imagine observing the stars one night and being overwhelmed with the structure and beauty of the universe. You try to share this experience and think that the word God describes it best. Consequently, you communicate the belief that God exists. Unfortunately, people use the word God to describe many different things. Some people use the word God to describe a supernatural intelligence that created the universe and cares about people's affairs in the present. Others use the word to describe a supernatural intelligence that has created the laws of the universe, but does not intervene. A third camp does not use the word to describe a supernatural being, but uses the word God as a poetic synonym for the universe or its laws. However, when we analyze how most people actually use the term God, we realize that they usually refer to a theistic God. Now, it does not make much sense to ask if your original belief is true, since most other people will think you are referring to another experience, and after a while you might be confused yourself. Therefore, we must specify your language and use the code words that describe your experience as best as possible. Then we can ask if this belief is true, if it properly represents reality. Now we know how to understand our beliefs. However, we still do not know how to find out if our beliefs represent reality. So, in a second step we must find a way, a method, to actually sort the true from the false. There are a variety of methods to choose from, and experience has shown that some of these methods give us a higher degree of certainty, or a greater probability that our beliefs are true, than others. I will give a brief overview of these methods, starting with the most reliable, and ending with the most unreliable. This illustration is not intended to be complete. For example, I do not discuss the method of our own daily experience. The methods of logic and mathematics provide the greatest certainty we have yet been able to find. However, we will focus on logic in philosophy, since you are probably familiar with the method of mathematics. Logic is the study of correct and incorrect reasoning and is often expressed by an argument. An argument is a collection of statements, called the premises, that are given as reasons or evidence for a conclusion. Now, one of the main points of logic is to evaluate such arguments. The first criterion for evaluation is to judge the strength of the premises for the conclusion. Consider this example. All bald men are grandfathers. Harold is bald. Therefore, Harold is a grandfather. Now, if the premises of this argument would be true, the conclusion would necessarily be true as well. If all bald men would be grandfathers and if Harold would be bald, he would necessarily be a grandfather. We assume that the premises are true. If an argument then intends to make the conclusion a necessity, it's called deductive. And depending on whether it then actually succeeds to show that the conclusion follows with necessity, it's called valid or invalid. The second criterion is to judge if the premises are in fact true. If the argument is valid and if the premises are true, the argument is called sound. However, whether the premises are true is something that we won't often be able to decide as a matter of logic. Whether all bald men are grandfathers is an empirical question, which leads us to the next method. The next greatest certainty has been found in the application of the scientific method to empirical problems. The scientific method isn't a simple linear process, and in the real world there are many complexities and practicalities to deal with. However, for simplicity, we can characterize the process through 5 stages. First, we observe. We look at the world and find a result that seems curious. Second, we hypothesize. We come up with a possible explanation. We then use inductive logic to make predictions. These predictions must be falsifiable and specific. Fourth, we test these predictions. We compare the predictions with new evidence. If the experiment disproves the original hypothesis, we may need to go back and refine it. And if it approves the hypothesis, people go and reproduce the results. The practice of experimental control and reproducibility can diminish the potentially harmful effects of cognitive biases. 2 other important elements of the scientific process are scientific skepticism and methodological naturalism. Scientific skepticism is a position, according to which no new hypothesis is considered a theory until sufficient evidence is provided, and it is always assumed that something might disprove a current theory. Methodological naturalism is a position that is assumed by science. The assumption is that all effects have natural causes and can be fully explained by empirical investigation. Supernatural causes are not considered. However, methodological naturalism makes no claim about the actual existence of natural and supernatural causes. It's just a tool to make science work. Finally, it may be useful to keep in mind that there is also a continuum of certainty in the field of the scientific method itself. Different sciences and different forms of evidence produce results that are more or less reliable. Physics will be more reliable than chemistry, which will be more reliable than biology, which will be more reliable than psychology, which will be more reliable than social sciences. In the health or medical sector, systematic reviews and meta-analysis will generally give you a higher degree of certainty than cohort studies, and so on. You get the point. Then, we have inductive logic. We already know the basic structure of an argument from discussing deductive logic earlier. Now, the difference here is the strength of the premises for the conclusion. Consider this example. Only a few humans live past the age of 100. You are a human. Therefore, you will not live past the age of 100. Now in this example the premises make the conclusion likely, but not inescapable. We assume that the premises are true. If an argument then intends to lead to its conclusion with high probability, it's called inductive. Depending on the actual strength of the argument, we might say that the argument is inductively strong or inductively weak. We can then again judge if the premises are true. If the argument is inductively strong, and if its premises are true, it's called cogent. This type of reasoning is what we often mean when we talk about critical thinking, and there are certain rules to make this type of reasoning more successful. For example, to avoid logical fallacies, which will be the topic of the next video. Finally, we will look at faith. Faith produces the most uncertain results for obvious reasons. The method is pretty easy to grasp. You basically get an idea, from tradition, desire, emotion or somewhere else. And then you keep it. without providing any proof and without looking at any contradicting evidence. So, according to the theory of knowledge I defend here, knowing what's true means to have a high degree of certainty, or a high objective probability, that one's belief is true. And some methods give us a higher degree of certainty that our beliefs represent reality than others. However, there are two more questions that need to be answered. First, how do we know that these methods, like logic and science, give us a high degree of certainty that our beliefs are true, and a higher certainty than other methods? The simple answer is because they work. Because of their successes, particularly in the following two areas. An accurate method will lead us to conclusions that successfully anticipate the future, to a degree and with a frequency that is not possible by chance. Moreover, an accurate method will lead to results that are consistent with each other, which would be an improbable coincidence if there were no stable truth being hit upon. Now, it should be obvious that the methods that are higher up on this scale have more predictive success and produce more consistent results. Imagine you are looking for a gas station. And you know with absolute certainty that there is a gas station on one of these roads, and that there is no gas station on the left road. Now, which of these approaches will succeed most often? The last question that needs to be answered is, how high does the degree of certainty need to be, for a belief to count as true? For example, philosophical skeptics propose that we can't be sure that anything we believe is true. According to the skeptical hypothesis, you can't know that you are not just a brain in a vat. It is possible that a mad scientist put your brain in a vat of life-sustaining liquid and connected its neurons by wires to a supercomputer that is simulating reality. You couldn't tell the difference between these simulated experiences and your normal experiences. Therefore, you can't know that you are not a brain in the vat. And if you don't know that your experience is connected to reality, you can't really know that anything is true. This is certainly an interesting problem, and it is difficult to show that we are not a brain in a vat. However, this doesn't need to bother us too much. If we go back and analyze what we mean by the word truth, we realize that we use the word differently in different contexts. What changes is the level of certainty that we think must be met for something to be true. If you are having a discussion with a philosophical skeptic, you will think your beliefs must be infallible to count as true. We might call this philosophical truth. However, if you later discuss with a flat earther whether the earth is round, you will not care about the possibility that the earth and everything you experience could be a delusion. You will still think it's true that the earth is round. In this context, a lower level of certainty is good enough to count as truth. So, there is no general answer to the questions of how much certainty we need for a belief to count as true. The threshold we define will differ with the situation and the subject of investigation. In the context of investigating the makeup of reality, there will be no absolute certainty, and we might agree that we should at least have very strong inductive inferences to say that anything is true. However, how we define these thresholds, for something to count as true, is less crucial than us actually trying to make all our beliefs as probable as possible. Making this video took a lot of time, and if you enjoyed it, feel free to like and subscribe. See you next time.